Leaders at the Illinois-Venezuelan alliance are speaking out about the capture and ongoing crisis within the country. President of the board of directors there, Luciano Pedota, says the legality of foreign involvement in Venezuela should be decided by international courts and U.S. institutions. He notes Venezuela has been reeling from nearly 3 decades of authoritarian rule, and while he feels oil is a factor, he says narco-trafficking and a humanitarian crisis are also driving the situation. From what he sees, most Venezuelans were celebrating Maduro's recent capture. He believes this could be a turning point.
We don't want any war. We want a peaceful transition. We want to get back to the democracy that we had before Chavismo arrived. How we get there, that's a whole separate question.
Now, Pedota realizes American economic interests are in Venezuelan oil, and he thinks outside investment is needed. The U.S. isn't the only country involved.
We want to make use of the proceeds from the oil sales to rebuild our country. And we know, we're very aware that at the beginning we're going to need American help.
He says child malnutrition in Venezuela is at record levels. He feels the country is in crisis with a real need for international attention.